we saw this detonation of these pager devices and then these walkie-talkie devices that seemed to protract some very surgical destruction of the Hezbollah senior elites. Now, on top of that, Israel's now sent in missile strikes. I think there's 180 dead. And now China has asked for its citizens to leave Israel. Colonel, this seems like it's heating up in a significant way. Can you dissect maybe some of the events of the past 7 days, why they happened, maybe why they happened now, and what do you think is really going on here?
In order for Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government to, quote unquote, be successful in their minds, the war has to expand, and the United States must be drawn into it. So that has been on the table, I would say, for the last 8 or 9 months. He now has essentially what he wanted. We have assembled thousands of aircraft, bombers. We have hundreds of ships, multiple carrier battle groups all over the place. And we have actually privately communicated to him, as far as I can tell, in the Department of Defense, saying, look, if you're going to do this, you better get going, because we cannot maintain all these forces indefinitely floating at sea or sitting around in bases inside or around the Middle East. We either do it or don't. So I think what you're seeing now is the beginning of do it. Now, what happened with Hezbollah? First of all, I don't think that this had nearly the effect on Hezbollah that is popularized in the West. A lot of these people may have had some connection to Hezbollah, but it looks like they've harmed lots of civilian operatives as opposed to real fighters. And there's always this assumption that if you get a few senior people, that's going to cripple the organization. This was the assumption that Hitler made in 1941 before they went into Russia, that the Soviet armed forces had been crippled because thousands of officers had been killed. Well, it certainly had an effect, but not quite what he had hoped for. And in fact, what you usually end up seeing, new blood surfaces, new people come up through the ranks. They turn out to frequently be better than who was there to begin with. So I don't think that it had the desired effect. What it did is it's probably hardened the hearts and attitudes of people around the world towards Israel, because they see this as tantamount to a war crime. Of course, when people say, do you think this is a war crime? I said, well, I've been to war, and war is a crime. So, you can mince words on this, but war is all about killing and maiming and destroying. So the Israelis are now interested in dragging us in. How do they get the United States involved, since we are all sitting there waiting to attack? Well, you've got to go into Lebanon. If you don't go into Lebanon, and I mean on the ground, you're not going to get the Iranians to engage. Hezbollah is suffered, but Hezbollah is still in very strong shape. It has enormous missiles and rockets in its arsenal. Its fighters are battle hardened. It's ready to fight. So you can drop bombs on it to your heart's content, but the only way to really fight and win against Hezbollah is to go in on the ground. Now, the Israelis have a problem. They don't have a very large ground force. Most of their reservists are now tied down in Gaza and on the West Bank. And that's very dangerous, because in Jordan and Egypt, those governments are hanging on by a thread. Abdullah's government walked out on him. Sisi, I think, is scheduled for removal. It's just a question of when. We continue to bribe him and Abdullah and everybody else in the region to stay out, but the populations want action. So you've got about 11.2 million Palestinians living in Jordan. What's to stop them from engaging with the West Bank? So it's a very dangerous situation that Israel is in, and they've moved all their regular troops, their best troops, north to deal with Lebanon. But they're not fools. If they take heavy casualties, as they have in the past when they went into southern Lebanon, they're not going to continue north. They're going to back up. And I think when that happens, they're going to turn to us and say, you've got to help us. What are you going to do now? In other words, they have to go into Lebanon, and they have to take losses, and they have to be weakened before we will engage. And at that point, what does Iran do? Does Iran sit quietly, or does Iran feel compelled to intervene and support Hezbollah? I don't know the exact answer, but I think moving in on the ground into Lebanon is the strategic game changer in the region. That's when you have a very high probability of engaging us and Iran in the war. Then it becomes a regional war. And, anything is possible at that stage. Now, there are thousands of Russians on the ground in Iran building air and missile defenses. That's not because the Iranians can't do it. They have a lot of very well trained and intelligent people, but they're trying to do things very, very rapidly that would have otherwise taken years. They also have given the Iranians some additional weaponry. Certainly, they have access to hypersonic missiles. And if we've learned anything, a hypersonic missile that flies at least 4,500 miles per hour, all the way up to 7,600 miles per hour, cannot be shot down. We know that. How many missiles do they have, and how many of these can they fire, and what will they target? Well, we know that Hezbollah has managed to fly its unmanned aircraft all over Israel. They have taken extensive footage, so they know where everything is. So do the Iranians. The Iranians have satellites and access to satellites. And I think the Russians are going to provide them with the data, just as we've provided exceptional data to both the Ukrainians and to the Israelis. So one wonders, how do you get through this without a major war? I'm not sure we can. Something's going to go wrong. Something is going to blow up on our faces. And I don't know what that means for us. I'm very worried. I'll be frank with you. I'm most concerned about the 7,000 to 10,000 U.S. soldiers on the ground in Iraq, in Syria, and Jordan. We don't have the means to evacuate severely wounded quickly. We don't have the means to get them out of where they are quickly. So if this blows up, how many of those soldiers do we lose? They've already come under attack in northeastern Syria. We're not being told how many were killed or wounded. Those numbers are suppressed. Just as the Israelis are suppressing news, our news media suppresses this kind of information. But I'm very worried about them. And if the American people discover that we have lost significant numbers of American soldiers because they're sitting there like bait, there's going to be hell to pay here in the United States. When I was in the Pentagon briefly, I asked at the time, because President Trump was interested in getting out of Iraq and Syria, I asked at the time, what are we doing there? And they said, well, we're there to deter Iran. And I said, well, how's that work? Has it made any difference to the Iraqi militias or to the Syrian militias and the rest of these people? And they said, well, no. Well, they're a tripwire. I said, a tripwire for what? To bring us into war. Well, the tripwires are risky because they could be exterminated very quickly. And if that happens, I think there'll be people that will say, well, we have to take action, but there are going to be a lot of other people who are going to say, what were they doing there to begin with? Why were we there? What are we defending that we can't live without? And somebody said to me in the building, well, we have to be there as early warning for the Israelis. And I laughed in his face, having been to Israel many times. If there's one government, one military organization that knows more about what's happening in the Middle East than anybody else in the world, it's the Israelis. Now, that doesn't mean they can't make mistakes, and they have. They've miscalculated. I think strategically right now they're in trouble. But the point is, the notion that a few thousand American soldiers are going to somehow or another provide early warning or deter somebody is absurd. It's not going to happen. So that's my greatest concern. What do we do about these thousands of troops that are at very, very severe risk of losing their lives? And then I think we're going to watch as Hezbollah is already doing. If you look at what's happening in Haifa right now in Tel Aviv, they can destroy those cities in short order. They'll burn everything down. Hezbollah has actually said they'll move into Galilee. They'll invade Israel if the Israelis try to go into southern Lebanon. And now we haven't even talked about Iran and what's at their disposal. And then people point out, well, the Israelis have nuclear weapons. Well, that's true. And what happens if they use one? Whatever legitimacy they may have ever had, I think at that point will be completely gone. That's the danger. Israel is the legacy of the Second World War. It's a legacy of the Holocaust. So many of us, I'm one of them, always viewed Israel as this morally righteous place. It deserves to exist. It has to set an example. It has to be more than most states. Well, if you use this nuclear weapon, whatever reputation for goodness or morality they may have ever had is gone. And the other thing is that you then legitimate the use of nuclear weapons against yourself. And anybody who doesn't think that nuclear weapons could arrive in short order in the hands of Israel's enemies is foolish. They could. The Pakistanis have always, offered nuclear weapons to the Turks because they're both largely Sunni Muslims. And I don't know what the Iranians would do, but I think the Iranians could then decide that they have no choice. They've got to actually finish the job and build the weapon. So it's a terrible situation. And we don't have anybody leading us anywhere that makes sense. No one has stepped forward as, and if you go back to Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, all of these presidents, Carter, everybody intervened at some point in time to say, enough. Let's look for another way out of this. There's nobody doing that now. And it looks like Mr. Netanyahu is firmly in command of the U.S. armed forces, at least those that are poised to attack in the Middle East. It's very dangerous.
Hey, I know investing in crypto is scary. It takes a real leap of faith because there are so many scams, rug pulls, and bad actors out there. It's a dangerous business, which is why 95% of people lose all their money. Well, that's why I created the London Real Investment Club, so you can access the hottest deals on the planet and use the crypto bull market to create the generational wealth that you deserve. Join my team of over 100 people from around the world that are making millions of dollars behind the scenes investing in blockchain, AI, Web3 games, DeFi, Bitcoin, and more. Don't miss out. Click the link below to book a call with one of my team now. But hurry, this bull market will end soon.
I know investing crypto can be scary. That's why you gotta join the investment club. Pull the trigger. Let's do this.